Coming up on The World Today. Leaders of Russia and China hold virtual summit amid tensions with the West. Hundreds rescued after fire breaks out at Hong Kong's World Trade Center. Plus, the South African High Court orders former President Jacob Zuma back to prison, declaring his medical parole unlawful. Hello and welcome to the program. I'm Teniola Shobowale. We begin with the warning from the World Health Organization that the new coronavirus variant Omicron is spreading across the globe at an unprecedented rate. Cases of the heavily mutated variant have been confirmed in 77 countries. WHO Chief Dr. Tedros Ghebreyesus has called for countries to step up measures to curb the new strain with a combination of mask wearing, social distancing, as well as vaccination. Here's more on this and other developments from around the world on our Global Update.
Hello, everyone. Thank you very much.
The World Health Organization says all countries need to step up measures against the highly mutated coronavirus variant, which has been spreading at an unprecedented rate and probably already in most countries.
77 countries have now reported cases of Omicron, and the reality is that Omicron is probably in most countries, even if it hasn't been detected yet. Omicron is spreading at a rate we have not seen with any previous variant. We're concerned that people are dismissing Omicron as mild. Surely, we have learned by now that we underestimate this virus at our peril.
Well, South Korean Prime Minister Kim Bong-kyung says the government is considering plans to further tighten countermeasures in a bid to curb the spread of the coronavirus. South Korea reported 7,850 new coronavirus cases over the past 24 hours, its highest daily total, as breakthrough infections among those already vaccinated continue to spike, with the number of patients in serious condition also reaching a fresh high of 964. The French government says it expects to see around 4,000 patients in intensive care with COVID-19 by the Christmas holidays. Over the past 24 hours, the country reported 63,405 coronavirus infections, the second highest number of new infections this year since April. Authorities also reported 158 COVID-19 deaths, pushing the death toll to 120,832. German Chancellor Olaf Scholz has vowed to win the fight against the coronavirus pandemic, imploring Germans in his first major address to the parliament to get vaccinated as the only way out of the crisis. He says there are no red lines for his government in tackling the fourth wave of the pandemic, which experts say is largely driven by a relatively high percentage of unvaccinated citizens. Elsewhere in Europe, Spain has kicked off its COVID-19 vaccination campaign for 5 to 11-year-olds. Spain's Health Commission approved on December 7 vaccinations against COVID-19 for children under 12, following a recommendation by the European Union's health regulator late last month. The decision comes as a country with 90% of people aged 12 and over already fully vaccinated seeks to address a rise in COVID-19 cases. And finally, Australia has reopened borders to vaccinated skilled migrants and foreign students after a near 2-year ban on their entry. The emergence of the new Omicron variant forced officials to delay the reopening by 2 weeks after health officials sought a temporary pause to get more information about the strain, which so far appears to show milder symptoms than other COVID-19 variants.
Meanwhile, UK Prime Minister Boris Johnson is due to hold a press briefing at Downing Street in a few minutes in the face of growing pressure from his own advisors to enforce new, tougher restrictions. Well, earlier he defended his handling of the COVID-19 pandemic, saying new curbs were needed to fight the new variant. It comes a day after the largest parliamentary vote against his administration by lawmakers from his own party. The British leader noted that the measures implemented in in response to the new Omicron variant, which includes ordering people to wear masks in public places and use COVID-19 passes for some venues were passed in Parliament. But the opposition Labour Party quickly pointed out that they were only approved because of its votes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The government is taking a balanced and a proportionate approach to dealing with the pandemic, and the House voted through Plan B, I think, with Conservative votes, Mr. Speaker, and we will continue with the massive booster rollout, to which he is a late convert. Since Friday, when I decided that we had to accelerate the booster programme in view of the data about Omicron, we've cut the timetable in half. Mr. Speaker, Monday was the biggest vaccination Monday in the history of this country, and yesterday was the second biggest vaccination achievement by the NHS ever. More than 500,000 jabs delivered, and the campaign continues. Further measures are needed, as the House will understand. If further regulation is needed, of course this House will have a further say. As for following his leadership, Mr. Speaker, they wibbled-wobbled over Plan B. They wibble-wobbled over quarantine, and if we listened to him, Mr. Speaker, we wouldn't even have the vaccine rollout, because we would have remained in the European Medicines Agency.
We now come to the Leader of the Opposition, Keir Starmer.
The Labour Party showed the leadership yesterday that the Prime Minister lacked.
Well, over in Germany, police in the eastern state of Saxony have launched a series of raids after death threats were made against Premier Michael Kretschmer for backing coronavirus measures. Far-right anti-vaccination activists are suspected of plotting violence with crossbows or other piercing weapons. Saxony has the lowest COVID vaccine take-up in Germany. Last year, Mr. Kretschmer warned of COVID hysteria, but he later apologized and has since backed strict measures. Away from the COVID-19 pandemic, a court in Germany has sentenced a Russian man to life in prison for shooting dead a Georgian of Chechen ethnicity in a Berlin park 2 years ago. The court found Vadim Krasikov guilty of gunning down Zelim Khan Kangoshvili at close range in August 2019. Judges said the Russian state had ordered the murder, which it denies. In a statement, Russia's ambassador to Germany, Sergei Nachayev, describes the verdict as a politically motivated decision. More than 1,200 people have been rescued from Hong Kong's World Trade Center as dozens of firefighters managed to put out a fire that ripped through one of the city's busiest buildings. Police at the scene say everyone at the 39-story structure in Causeway Bay has been brought to safety after more than 300 were trapped earlier on the rooftop of the building, which houses both offices and a shopping center. At least 13 people injured were taken to hospital.
At the time of the incident, we have received various assistance calls from the occupants inside the building. As I mentioned, our firemen discovered heavily smoke locked. The fire scene was heavily smoke locked at the time of our arrival. So, to a fireman, we found it is one of the reasons may lead to the distress to the occupants inside the building. The fire was surrounded at 15:05 hours, and the fire was largely put out by 16:30 hours. The affected area measures 100 meter by 30 meter.
Russian President Vladimir Putin and his Chinese counterpart Xi Jinping have held a video meeting. In their opening remarks at the virtual summit, Putin and Xi held relations between Russia and China, with the Russian leader declaring them a proper example of interstate cooperation in the 21st century. Xi said that the Russian president strongly supported China's efforts to protect key national interests and firmly opposed attempts to drive a wedge between their countries. China and Russia, once adversaries, have formed an ever tighter economic, military and geopolitical partnership under current leaders. U.S. and international affairs analyst Calvin Dark joins us now for more on this. Thank you so much for your time on the program.
Thank you.
So what are the implications of this meeting, especially as friction persists in both countries' relations with the West?
Well, I don't think you could find a bigger geopolitical example of the enemy of my enemy is my friend. And I think that that is what we can take from this meeting between China and Russia. And I also think that one of the implications from it is that they've realized that despite their differences, wouldn't call it an alliance, more of a partnership that they're forming, that they do have shared interests. And a lot of those shared interests depend on decreasing U.S. and Western influence on security, human rights, democracy, and other issues. So the implications are they've realized that despite their issues, they want to work together.
You know, the Russian president described the relationship as a proper example of interstate cooperation in the 21st century. What do you make of this statement?
Yes, I thought it was a really interesting way to describe the relationship, and I think it's clear what he meant. It is a proper example in the way that Russia and China would want it, meaning that countries should cooperate economically, strategically, and then turn a blind eye to what's going on in those other countries. And that refers to human rights protections, stifling of democracy. And both of those are serious issues in China and Russia. So I think the message they're sending from that quote is we should all work together to our economic and strategic interest and turn a blind eye to things that we may not like, but they're other people's business.
But with that being said, do you think the U.S. could ever get to the point where relations with these two countries would basically be better than what we've seen in recent times?
Yes, I definitely think they can be better, although we have to manage our expectations about what better means. Will the U.S. and China and Russia be allies in the sense that the U.S. has other allies around the world? Not likely anytime soon. But I do believe that there is a possibility that better can mean agreement on certain issues so that we can work together. And a prime example of this is what's happening at the border with the Ukraine. Something can happen between the U.S. and Russia, for example, to tamp down the tension. Doesn't mean we're going to be allies, but it does mean that there doesn't have to be these tense border skirmishes or potential skirmishes every few months with different places around the world, especially in Eastern Europe.
All right, then, U.S. and international affairs analyst Calvin Dark, thank you so much for your thoughts on the program.
Thank you.
Still to come on the program. Well, when we return, we'll meet the owners of the world's largest Christmas ornaments and brooch collections. You don't want to miss it. Please stay with us. Thanks for staying with us. The United Nations Human Rights Office says Ukraine has cracked down on media and rights to freedom of expression and peaceful assembly. The debate at the UN Human Rights Council was held amid mounting tensions between Ukraine and Russia. Ukraine accuses Russia of amassing around 100,000 troops in preparation for a possible military offensive, which Russia denies. Nada Al-Nashif, Deputy UN High Commissioner for Human Rights, says activists, journalists and critics in Ukraine have been arrested for challenging the Kyiv government's narratives or investigating corruption or COVID-19 restrictions.
While the government made some efforts to improve the situation, in most cases, authorities failed to protect members of civil society from attack or to hold perpetrators accountable. Impunity fuels further attacks, contributing to an environment of self-censorship, narrowing civic space, and curtailed pluralism. In territory controlled by the government, restrictions on the free expression of critical or unpopular opinions and on participation in peaceful assemblies on sensitive topics, as well as the safety of human rights defenders in Ukraine, were of concern. Political and legislative developments resulted in restrictions on civic space and attacks against opposition political parties, their members, and staff impacted freedoms of expression, peaceful assembly and association, and the right to participate.
An EU Commission President Ursula von der Leyen says the EU is ready to scale up its sanctions and take unprecedented measures against Russia if it shows further aggression towards Ukraine. Von der Leyen, speaking in the European Parliament, says the EU has worked closely with the United States to draw up options going beyond existing sanctions targeting Russia's financial and energy sectors.
There's a whole set of economic sanctions in place, targeting the financial and energy sector, dual-use goods and defense. Our response to any further aggression may take the form of a robust scaling up and expansion of these existing sanctions. And of course, we are ready to take additional, unprecedented measures with serious consequences for Russia. But above all, I call on Russia to de-escalate, to pursue diplomatic channels, and to abide by its international commitments. Conflicts must be solved peacefully.
Meanwhile, the daughter of jailed Russian opposition politician Alexei Navalny has received the EU's top human rights Sakharov Prize at the European Parliament. Daria received the prize on behalf of her father, who is serving a 2.5-year jail term. The €50,000 Sakharov Prize for Freedom of Thought is awarded every year. Past winners include former South African President Nelson Mandela and Pakistani education activist Malala.
Non-pragmatic people on the planet. This is the Sakharov Prize, and Andrei Sakharov was probably one of the most non-pragmatic people on the planet. I don't understand why those who advocate for pragmatic relations with dictators can't simply open the history books. It would be a very pragmatic act, and having it done, it's very easy to understand the inescapable political law. The pacification of dictators and tyrants never works.
A South African court has ruled that the country's former president, Jacob Zuma, should be returned to prison, saying his medical parole was unlawful. The Pretoria court ruled that the time he has spent out of prison should not be counted in his 15-month sentence. Zuma was released on the 5th of September for an undisclosed medical condition. He had been jailed for failing to attend an inquiry into corruption during his presidency. The 79-year-old handed himself in to police in July after a public standoff, but his jailing sparked violent protests and looting. And U.S. President Joe Biden is on his way to Kentucky 5 days after a series of deadly tornadoes touched down in the region. More than 30 tornadoes tore through Kentucky and 4 other states over the weekend, killing at least 88 people, 74 of them in Kentucky, and leaving many others still unaccounted for. The storms demolished homes, downed power lines, and cut off residents from key utilities as temperatures dropped below freezing in Kentucky earlier this week.
President Biden, about 800,000 coronavirus deaths. Do you have a statement on your responsibility, and why haven't you asked China to do more to be transparent on the origins? Mr. President.
U.S. Secretary of State Anthony Blinken says the United States is looking at what additional steps to take against Myanmar's military leaders and also actively looking at whether treatment of the Rohingya Muslim minority might constitute genocide. He made the comments during a trip to Malaysia where Foreign Minister Saifuddin Abdullah said U.S. President Joe Biden had invited members of the Association of Southeast Asian Nations to a summit meeting, and the invitation would be discussed by the bloc's foreign ministers on January 19. Blinken also adds that the U.S. is prepared to move forward with the sale of F-35 fighter jets and drones to the United Arab Emirates after reports the UAE intended to suspend discussion of the deal. Let's take a listen. Oh, it seems we don't have that soundbite, but moving on now, 11 bodies have been found while 25 people remain missing after a boat carrying suspected undocumented migrants from Indonesia capsized off Malaysia. There were 14 people reported safe among the estimated 50 aboard the boat, which capsized off southern Johor State around 4:30 a.m. The survivors and the boat were found on the beach in Tanjung Balau, and the Malaysian Maritime Enforcement Agency said a search and rescue operation had been launched for those missing. And finally on the programme, on some lighter note, a Welsh woman known as Nana Bubbles has broken a world record for her collection of nearly 1,800 Christmas ornaments, while another Briton has taken the title for the largest festive brooch collection, clinching the Global Authority on Record-Breaking's title for largest collection of Christmas bauble ornaments. As of December the 1st, Pope has collected 1,760 Christmas bauble ornaments. She said her haul is always continuing to grow. And for Adam White, his brooch collection amounted to 7,929 as of December the 2nd.
Well, my grandchildren brought their children here and they saw what I'd done to the ceiling. They were, oh my gosh, oh my gosh. Every year they can't wait for them to go up. They know that it's coming towards Christmas. There's a few more that I have to add to this year's collection. We didn't have a lot. We weren't very well off, and that's why when it comes to Christmas now, I will do what I can to afford, well, what I can afford to do a good Christmas for the children.
Awesome stuff. And that's the programme today. Thank you so much for watching. I'm Tenyola Shubawale. Bye for now.